Assalamu alaikum and good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Institute of Regional Studies, CSCCC, and STBI, I would like to welcome you all to our event today, which is PRECOP26 from Paris to Glasgow. Today, we'll have two sessions which will be covering very important and pertinent topics. But before we begin, we would like to start with the recitation from the Holy Quran.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إنا أعطيناك الكوثر فصل لربك وانحر إن شانئك هو الأبتر.
Before we begin, I would like to tell everyone that if you are tweeting about the event, there's a specific hashtag that you can use for that. So please note these down and then you can just use those for all the tweets. Now, I would like to request Ambassador Nadeem Riaz, President, Institute of Regional Studies, to take the podium and give his welcome remarks.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum and good morning to everyone. Honorable and Dilip Abbas Saiba, Excellencies, our guests from outside Islamabad, and I would like to take their names. Mr. Sabur Kakar, Secretary Environment Balochistan, Muhammad Aslam Ghori, Secretary Environment Sindh, Imran Nadeem Shigri, MLA Gilgit-Baltistan. Thank you for coming in this weather and thank you for traveling during this period of COVID. Honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege to welcome you all to today's event, which the Institute of Regional Studies is co-hosting with CSCCC and STPI. Climate change remains a major threat today. It can affect vast populations with food insecurity, water scarcity, flooding, infectious diseases, extreme heat, economic losses, and displacement. The impact of climate change on people has led the World Health Organization to turn climate change the greatest threat to global health in the 21st century. As per report of the Economic Intelligence Unit published in 2019, climate change impacts will cost the world US $7.9 trillion by 2050. Ladies and gentlemen, as per a study of the Asian Development Bank and the World Bank, Pakistan is facing up to 3.8 billion in annual economic losses due to the effects of climate change. Temperatures in Pakistan are expected to increase by 2.5 degrees over the next 2 decades. Although Pakistan contributes little to global greenhouse gas emissions, yet it is very vulnerable to the effects of climate change. Dear participants, it may be recalled that under the 2015 Paris Agreement, nations collectively agreed to keep warming well under 2 degrees through mitigation effects. However, with pledges made under the agreement, global warming could still reach about 2.8 degrees by the end of this century. As such, limiting warming to 1.5 degrees would require reducing emissions by half by the year 2030 and achieving near zero emissions by the year 2050. The Paris Agreement was adopted in December 2015 by 197 countries, and it marked a turning point in the global efforts to tackle climate crisis. The agreement works on a 5-year cycle of increasing ambitious climate actions to be carried out by the signatories. Ladies and gentlemen, However, the existing challenges to climate change have made it necessary that countries should come prepared to the forthcoming COP26 with renewed pledges of reducing carbon emissions. COP26 also takes on a special significance as the fifth summit since the Paris Agreement, which according to the treaty means countries must come with their updated nationally determined contributions, the NDCs. The upcoming COP26, which you all know, will be co-hosted by the United Kingdom and Italy in Glasgow from the 31st of October to the 12th of November. The event is being regarded as a momentous one, the biggest climate movement since the Paris Agreement, which could be the last chance, which a number of panelists say, for countries to agree to slow global warming. It is estimated that over 200 world leaders and an estimated 36 to 38,000 delegates would be attending this event. At COP26, discussions are expected to focus on zero emission targets, policies to help vulnerable communities adapt to the consequences of climate crisis, and the various financial impacts and aspects. Ladies and gentlemen, COP26 is expected to allow countries to assess progress towards the 100 billion goal and set new targets for climate finance, shifting to nature-based solutions and protection of biodiversity. It will also be the first time nations will be convening since the US departure and subsequent re-entry to the Paris Agreement. Dear participants, COP26 is expected to play a crucial role in paving the path to sustainable recovery and setting ambitious but achievable targets for climate adaptation and mitigation. The key goal of COP26 is to keep a temperature rise limit of 1.5 degrees within reach. Dear participants, the global economic and social disruptions caused by the COVID pandemic has made countries around the world realize the value of building back green to stimulate economic recovery and strengthen societal resilience to crisis and fragility. One of the key issues that the COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted is the importance of coordinated efforts between international parties when dealing with global issues. Countries, despite political differences, need to work together to mitigate the harmful effects of climate change. Let us hope and pray that the upcoming COP26 meets its projected targets and sets the ball rolling to make the world a safer place for our future generations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Riaz, for your informative comments. Now I would like to request Aisha Khan, Chief Executive, CSCCC, to come on the stage and give her introductory comments.
Distinguished speakers and honorable guests. Every year since 2016, CSCCC has been organizing pre-COP meetings with multi-stakeholder participation. This year, it's a great privilege for us to have the Embassy of France, the Institute of Regional Studies, and the Sustainable Development Policy Institutes collaborate in co-hosting this event with us. COP26 could not take place in 2020 due to COVID-19 pandemic, and even now there are certain reservations about full participation and inclusivity. But be as that may, it is an important climate summit and the world will be watching closely. Climate change is a subject that concerns all of us. It is an existential threat and therefore it cannot be taken lightly or ignored. In recent years, we have seen climate shift from peripheral to center stage. It is now an integral part of all socio-economic policies. It is also factored into political decisions, and it is a vital consideration in planning security strategies. Examples of the onset of the climate crisis are manifesting themselves in different parts of the world. We have seen temperatures spike in northwestern US and Canada, floods in Europe, wildfires in Siberia, Greece, Brazil, and California, the devastation wreaked by the Hurricane Ida, and the first famine as a result of climate in Madagascar. Climate scientists have been predicting about the dangers of a rapidly warming world for a long time now. But I think what is more alarming about these recent developments is that they're crossing the anticipated timelines and happening much faster. Similarly, climate negotiations have been taking place since 1996, but it was not until 2015 that an agreement was reached in Paris that now serves as the compass for international climate action. The Paris Agreement was hailed as a triumph of French diplomacy for bringing 196 or 97 countries to agree on an agenda of solutions. As Ambassador Nadeem pointed out, the nationally determined contributions are at the heart of the Paris Agreement. New and updated NDCs will be the subject of discussion at COP26. The Plan, Implement, Review cycle supports the agreement to comprehensively take stock of the collective progress every 5 years. Global stocktake and the ambition mechanism will be critical in achieving the target of the Paris Agreement to keep temperatures increase within the safe threshold of 1.5 degrees Celsius. There'll be two important dimensions to the upcoming COP. The first one will be finalizing the technical issues carried over from COP25. These include funding for loss and damage, carbon market mechanisms, delivery of the 100 billion finance targets, and setting new targets for climate finance by 2025. The other dimension will be galvanizing support and commitment from countries on ambitious NDCs for keeping temperature increase well below 1.5 or within 1.5 degrees Celsius. The Paris Agreement was a skeletal framework that was fleshed out at subsequent COPs between 2015 and 2019. Now, all eyes are on the UK to see how it steers the process forward. COP26 will be taking place in the backdrop of unprecedented climate disasters, IPCC reports with grim predictions, and a world still reeling from the effects of COVID pandemic. These are the issues that will be the focus of our discussion today. We look forward to hearing from our panelists and receiving questions and comments from the audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Aisha Khan, for sharing your views with us. Today, we're very privileged to have Ms. Andali Abbas, Parliamentary Secretary for Foreign Affairs, here with us. I would now request her to take the podium and please give her keynote speech.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and good morning and bonjour. I think it's a great pleasure for me and a really heartwarming thing to see COP26 being pre-discussed and debated at the highest level. To call it climate change is, I think, a euphemism. We are going through climate shocks. And we stand at the turn of history, I think, because in 100 years, what has happened in the last 1.5 years never happened. And this pandemic is as a result of criminal negligence of the citizens of the world on giving respect, regard, and due diligence to the environment in which we live. And I think that at this moment, when the Glasgow summit is going to be held, never have the leaders of the world been so conscious of what has happened and what can happen than now. So it's a great opportunity. The problem with summits and the problem with conferences and the problem with meetings is that you keep the minutes and forget the hours. So we need to be, I think we are at a very opportune moment at the moment. As Aisha mentioned and Ambassador Nadeem also mentioned, a lot of agreements are made and they turn into disagreements. And then deadlines are never met. And there's always irresponsible attitude towards environment at all levels. So that is why I say that as nature has struck back, because we have degraded nature, this virus is from zoonotics. And I'm not a scientist or a virologist or a biologist, but I know for the fact that when you encroach the habitat and you disturb the ecobalance, then they're forced to come at you. A bad environment is fodder for viruses. And we encroaching their environment and not taking care of them, they are going to come at us. And that is why it is a lesson for us in the world that this virus caged us for 1.5 years. And the imprisonment is not over. The lockdowns are still going on. Reduced human activity to almost nothing. And I can't even calculate the losses that we've had. So for us, our focus on COP25 should be a very integrated and wholesome focus. Yes, there are agreements. Yes, there are contributions. Yes, there are commitments to be made. Yes, the money should be behind it. Climate finance is important, but also the socio-economic aspect of it, the ethics and value aspect of it, the responsibility aspect of it. What values are we leaving for our future generations? That is a deeper root cause that has brought up to this 100 years. For 99 years, because this did not happen, we did not care. But it has happened. So what Ambassador Nadeem and Aisha has very rightly pointed out, the IPCC study has clearly pointed out that, ladies and gentlemen, if you think this is hot and unbearable, it's going to get worse. So we are screaming at 1.5 degrees centigrade going up, and that has caused hurricane avalanches. Views that we used to see in movies are happening live. From Karachi to New York to London, we have seen inundated water over there. Coastal floods are there. Urban flooding is there. 30 hurricanes have taken place. The hottest decade in human history we are going through. And that's just 1.5 degrees that we are talking about. As very rightly pointed out in the IPCC, that by the end of the century, in 80 years, our children, our grandchildren will have 4 degrees centigrade. So I shudder even to imagine what will happen to our glaciers, to our waters, to our sea levels, which have, by the way, gone up by 1.5%. And you have earthquakes. Yesterday, there was an earthquake in Mexico, and you have earthquakes every other day, somewhere happening in the world. So the nature and the earth is reacting, rejecting. Whatever we've done so far has not been enough. And like we say in Pakistan, standing at this time, Pakistan, there's a study, as he mentioned, in World Bank, Asian Development Bank, very clearly says that Pakistan's contribution may be very little, but it is getting more and more vulnerable. And that is why they are saying that the heat level in Pakistan maybe up another 2.5 degrees in the next 30 years. And can you imagine that we had 2 weeks of heat wave in Karachi in 2015? Over 1,000 people died and 65,000 people were hospitalized. And these are just recorded things that I'm telling you in one city for 2 weeks. So our government has been absolutely focused on climate change. As you know, the Prime Minister's passion, interest, there's hardly a day where he does not talk about climate change. In meetings which will have nothing to do with climate change, he'll be talking about it because he feels that climate change is the root cause. It is the overall envelope which, regardless of whether you are in IT or industry or energy, if you are not taking care of it, everything else will become zero. So the two things that we've done, and I'm in the climate change standing committee also, I'm in the, the Green Focus subcommittees also. When I came in the climate change committee, we were talking about the technology of the brick making industry causing the pollution. And then we in the standing committee said, no, we want to have a look at why Lahore has become the second most polluted city in the world. And we discovered that 43% of Lahore's smog was not due to the brick making, where a lot of emphasis was being made, but due to the fuel quality of the transport. And the fuel quality of the transport was Euro 1. That is why the government made a policy, and the standing committee really expedited it, that we should shift to Euro 5, which has obviously the magnesium element in it, which is so poisonous less. And because it's transport, the electric vehicle policy has come in, and you see the introduction of electric vehicles coming in. There's a lot of resistance. The industry is resisting. As you know, it's a disruption innovation all over the world, and so in Pakistan, because there's a lot of employment involved. There are, the industry collusions over there. So it's a lot of work to be done. But the direction for the first time is right, because 43% is because of that. And you must have noticed the color of the sky in the world and in these cities when the lockdown took place. For the first time, we could see the sky's true color. And in fact, I think one of my best memories of the lockdown is when I was sitting on top in my balcony, and I came out at about 5 a.m. in the morning, and the sky was almost purple. It's beautiful. And that was like a feast for us, and it should be normal. But hey, the lockdown finished and we are back to gray and murky. So these are all things which are telling us that what we can have and what can be done. All is not lost. So what we are doing, what I would recommend for the COP26 pre, post, during the Glasgow meetings is, one, look at what the pandemic has taught us. The pandemic has taught us that as a world, we have to be together. So collaboration and cooperation between the rich and the poor, between the poor and the poor, between all countries. And I was glad that Pakistan was a case study by World Health Organization as for green jobs during pandemic. Because one thing that we discovered early on than the other countries was that the pandemic is less harmful in the open. So why just close down all jobs? And that's when the tree planting started, because it's in the open and it's individual. So social distancing can take place. And so we went massively into providing jobs, and they were called the green jobs. And there's a whole case study by the World Health Organization on it. So there are lessons to be learned from every country. I'm sure people have innovated, because disruption causes innovation by default. The second thing, and that's why I think that, like Gavi, the Global Alliance for Vaccine, we should have a GGGC or something like that, a global green alliance for countries to together fight this destructive pandemic of environmental degradation, not just corona. The second part that I think I would really like to learn from in this seminar and the other seminars is also that the concept of green economy, industries, because we are working on it in the standing committee and we're really finding it a challenge that we need to all look at. How can industry be tied with their taxes, with their incentives, all with the green carbon emissions, incentives, penalties we've tried, they should be there, but how can industrialization be given an incentive, a credit, a concession, a subsidy, all tied with how green they are, how responsible they are? So we need to work on that. And especially, I think we can learn from the other countries. We would love to learn from that, to be able to do it in Pakistan. We're already working on something on that, in that respect. And the third part, which I'm very interested in, and I'm also taking place, I'm speaking on this on the global advocacy climate change in UK, on the youth aspect of it. How young people, and especially in this part of the world where we have 60% of them, they are the real change agents, galvanizing them. You saw a small part of that, what we did in Gujranwala, when you told the youth that you can become a Guinness Book record maker. 50,000 trees were planted by school children in Gujranwala in record time. So that is the type of movement that we need to have all over the world. And I would also propose in this respect that every country should have a youth climate change champion. And there should be a youth Congress of climate change in the world. And they should be speaking against us, like Greta Thunberg. Because they are like a virus on the social media. Give it to them, and they can sit the whole night and the whole day and make you uncomfortable. So these are some of the suggestions that I have for this forum and for the other forums that are coming forward to ponder and come up with some solutions to that. As we know, nothing is green till everything is green. You don't have visas on air pollution. You can't stop them. You can't block them. So there's crop burning in Delhi, Lahore gets polluted. So as Margaret Mead said, and I think that's the thought that really struck me. She said, you cannot have a society if you destroy your environment. And that's what we need to think of as we move towards a very important COP26. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Anjali Abbas, Parliamentary Secretary for Foreign Affairs. She very rightfully pointed out that climate change is all-encompassing and affects everyone regardless of who and where they are. Hence, cooperation and coordination is the only way forward. Now we're going to move towards our first session, which is COP26 Opportunities and Challenges. Before I hand it over to the moderator, I would request the panel speakers to come onto the podium and give their opening statements, which we would request you to keep them between 3 to 5 minutes. We will start with His Excellency Dr. Christian Turner, the British High Commissioner to Pakistan.
Well, good morning. Thank you all very much indeed. Ambassador, thank you, Aisha, for the convening of CSCCC, and to Anne Lee, Parliamentary Secretary, for a wonderful from the heart exhortation of why we're here. We were saying before we came in, Afghanistan has inevitably been dominating a lot of our diplomatic and national concerns at the minute. But I really liked your quote, Anne Lee, on the minutes and the hours. And it is absolutely right that we are focused on this issue of climate change. It is a top priority for the British government. And I want to just say a little bit about what we're doing and put a challenge to you all. I begin with a confession. I used to be a climate change negotiator back in my youth, and so have always felt the importance of this issue. And back then, as I think, Ambassador, you pointed out, 20 years ago, the warnings about extreme weather events, we were expecting to see them in 2030 and 2040. Well, we're seeing them now in 2021. And we've already heard of how these heat waves, these floods, these fires, I think the highest temperature in the world was recorded in Pakistan this year. That figure of 2.5 degrees further in Pakistan is absolutely terrifying. So with that, the World Meteorological Organization concluding last week that climate and weather-related disasters have increased five-fold, 5 times in 50 years. And of course, the IPCC's Code Red for Humanity issued earlier in August. I don't think anyone now can be in any doubt about the urgency of the situation. The science is clear, the need to act, and that IPCC report did detail what we need to do to achieve a climate resilient net zero future. So I don't want to waste too much of my time talking about the problem and the fact that we need to act. I think we can all here take that as read. For COP26 in Glasgow, that is now just a matter of weeks away, this is a chance for the UK with Italy to convene the countries of the world and really see how we can move things to the next level. There are 4 goals that we are setting out for this. Let me quickly describe them. The first is to ask countries to come forward with ambitious 2030 emissions reductions targets that align with reaching net zero by the middle of the century and keep 1.5 degrees within reach. That is in effect a mitigation goal. The second is to push for further support for vulnerable countries like Pakistan to protect and restore ecosystems, build resilience, and avoid the loss of homes, livelihoods, and lives. That, of course, is a focus on adaptation. Third is a focus on finance and the commitment of developed countries to mobilize $100 billion in climate finance per year is a very steep one, and one that we think is absolutely essential. If we're not redirecting financial flows, including by mobilizing the private sector, we will fail. And I am very struck myself that in the last year, we are seeing capital, global capital, shift away from carbon. You know, dirty coal, big hydrocarbons, the money in the international business community, whatever we do as regulators, as policymakers, is shifting. And I'm quite excited about the conversation we are having with the business community here in Pakistan. I was part of a net zero event just at the end of August with 6 of the country's leading textile manufacturers, all of whom were saying, this makes business sense for us to get to net zero. So we are really seeing, I think, that climate sense is now business sense. And those green jobs that Anne-Lee was talking about, I think are very much part of the calculus. And finally, that plays to the 4th goal for the COP, which is partnership. It's collaboration. We can't do this without governments, businesses, civil society coming together to make real progress in reducing emissions. And that's why events like this are so important. So what does that mean for Pakistan? And my challenge to all of you is we can, I think, agree on the problem. We can agree on what needs to be done. But the challenge now is to really take a discussion in this kind of community and decide what that means for Pakistan. I believe that Pakistan is in a great position to show global leadership on climate change. As we've been saying, it's very vulnerable to the effects of climate change, one of the 5 or 6 most affected countries. One of my favorite statistics is that Pakistan has more glacial ice than any country in the world outside the polar regions. Annabelle and I went and saw it in person up in the Northern Territories late last year. And I really think that it's a reminder that if that ice melts, a 5-fold increase in glacial outflow, 70% of the country's water supply coming from those glaciers, if that goes, Pakistan has a really, really devastating problem. So it's a small emitter. but a big vulnerability. Therefore, the kinds of steps that Anleeb has described, Prime Minister Khan and the government taking, I think, are crucial. Those nature-based solutions, the planting of the trees, the 10 million trees tsunami is very important, but equally important is progressive engagement on renewables and the commitment to no new coal investment, which Prime Minister Khan made last December, with a very forward look on things like zero emission vehicles and watershed rehabilitation. So I think Pakistan has the tools to lead the way, to show other developing economies what is the art of the possible, and the UK is committed to helping. Specifically, we're helping with clean energy. I've mentioned that work with businesses to try and get the business community mobilizing their efforts. We're also helping with climate finance and accessing climate finance, including through national capital accounting and nature performance bonds, and also through adaptation resilience and helping communities respond to the impacts of climate change. And I'm happy to say a bit more about that in the Q&A if people are interested. So my challenge, I said I had for you all, is rather than saying there's a problem and it matters, say what can we do with our partnerships to try and have an effect and build a conversation in Pakistan that goes beyond the excellent work being done and show how Pakistan can be an international leader on climate change. My final comment is that the most important voice on climate change for me is not here today because she is at school in the UK. And I told her last night I was going to talk to all of you about her. Her name is Constance, and she is my 15-year-old daughter. And as Anleeb said, it is the youth who are most important in this conversation. And if ever I need urging to do a little bit more on climate change, to stop using the plastic bottles that I find in the house, to switch to using a cleaner fuel or a better vehicle, it is my daughter who gives me a hard time. And as any parent, particularly a father in the room knows, the biggest boss is definitely the daughter. It is the future generations who we're doing this for, and their voices are the ones we must listen to. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for your remarks. Now, I would like to request His Excellency Andrea Sperarese, Ambassador of Italy, to come and give his opening statement.
First of all, let me thank the organizers for this invitation, Ambassador Nadim Ghiaz, and greet all colleagues and distinguished guests. Italy was enthusiastically approaching this initiative that we had together with the United Kingdom. And it's a great honor to have the possibility to co-lead this initiative. Our Minister of Foreign Affairs, Luigi Di Maio, stated that Italy's maximum commitment as G20 president and COP26 co-partner to fostering a global recovery from the pandemic that is green, sustainable, and inclusive, and based on strengthening multilateral cooperation. This is a particularly important scope also for vulnerable countries, which due to COVID-19 will have fewer financial resources to combat the consequences of climate change. Our minister therefore expressed the hope that the international community will be able to develop a package of interventions to support the spending and investment capacities of the most vulnerable countries. And he stressed the importance of adopting a strategic perspective that looks at the sustainable development goals of UN 2030 agenda, including achieving climate neutrality by 2050. Finally, he underlined that to achieve the 2030 agenda goals, the international donor community will require the identification of further green finance tools, including through greater involvement of the private sector. Italy, as I said, feels a great honor and responsibility to co-chair COP26 works And we will collaborate with the United Kingdom to ensure that climate will therefore be the cornerstone of the Italian-British triangulation COP26, G20, G7. Unfortunately, Pakistan is currently facing a significant climate change challenge. The country contributes less than 1% of total greenhouse gas emissions, whereas according to the Global Climate Risk Index, Pakistan was the 8th country negatively affected by climate change between 1997 and 2016, with 141 weather events serious that caused losses estimated $3.8 billion. According to the latest forecast climate models, in the future, Pakistan may face 1. Greater variability in river flows due to the increased variability in rainfall and melting glaciers, an increase in the demand of irrigation water, a decrease in the yield of wet and basmati rice, and a gradual shift of the cultivation area towards the north of the country, a decrease in water for hydroelectric power generation, an increase in the demand for energy for air conditioning. Extreme heat waves can cause an increase in mortality. Heavy rainfall and flash floods can put a strain on urban drainage systems. Storm surge and sea level rise can negatively impact coastal infrastructures and livelihoods. Long before most countries, the GOP, the government of Pakistan, started to study and address the climate change challenges very early in the past. Following the publication of the World Conservation Strategy in 1980, the government of Pakistan developed the National Conservation Strategy for Pakistan, issued in 1992. In 1997, the government passed the Pakistan Environmental Protection Act. As a result, we acknowledge with a great admiration from Italy, Pakistan established the Ministry of Climate Change in April 2012, giving the ministry responsibility for disaster risk reduction and for spearheading national climate change initiatives, both in adaptation and mitigation. First of all, the 10 billion trees tsunami and the growing interest for the national parks. In front of such framework, Italy supported the government of Pakistan primarily through debt swap initiative that paved the way to present programs addressing climate-related challenges. Such approach takes into account three related perspectives. One, promoting a number of technical initiatives meant to align scientific research, institutional endorsement, education, and effective implementation. Two, providing realistic and replicable finance support. Three, ensuring that the procedures are as effective as they are complying with the institutional role implementation of effective procedures. I would like to renovate the commitment to keep supporting the government of Pakistan, as the most of the ongoing and upcoming initiatives will be focused on climate-related topics, such as EUCN, CKNT, and glaciers and students. As an innovative way of facing climate change challenges, Italy, with Pakistan, is prepared to work on an exchange basis as a network that shall involve academic, private sector youth, communicators from both countries, aiming to the same goals and to participate in the reflections of new green finance mechanisms. Finally, I'm glad to announce that on 24 and 25th of September, Italy has prepared with Pakistan and will host the COP26 side initiative, High Summit 2021, the international conference on mountain climate change and sustainable development, where Pakistan will play a central role in addressing of the challenges related to the conservation of the central Karakorum ecosystem, meant to be a model for the world. Again, in our country, we host a huge part of the UNESCO Universal Heritage, and even Italy is threatened. My city itself, Venice, is very vulnerable. 2 years ago, we had the worst flood of history, and out of my house, we had 1 meter of water. That would never happen. So we are also, all our historical heritage depends on the initiative we will have on climate. So we share this responsibility, and we will not forget that it can also be a boost for economies. For instance, in Italy, we provide special incentives and funds for those who renew the house, those who put renewable energies, those who take these environmental precautions. So it can also be a boost for the economy, not only a liability. It's not necessary to think that improve the attention to and respect for the environment can only be, and it can also be an economic opportunity. That's why, again, let me thank all the organizers and participants, and please, in our embassy, we are ready to discuss further initiatives if someone of you will find it useful. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency, for your opening statement. Now, I would like to request Mr. Yves Manville, Charge d'Affaires for France in Pakistan, to come on the podium and give his opening statement.
First of all, I would like to thank Ambassador Nadim Riaz and Director Aisha Khan and Honorable Andy Abbas for this conference and for their addresses to us, very inspired addresses. I would like to thank Pakistan and the government of Pakistan for its active engagement in the problematic of climate change. Well, Paris to Glasgow, Paris Climate Agreement is a collective compass for international action, climate action. As a guarantor of the spirit of the Paris Agreement, France will play its part in collaboration and under the presidency of Italy and United Kingdom to ensure that COP26 becomes a defining moment in the fight against global warming. I'm pleased to be here with my British and Italian colleagues to talk about progress made international climate action and the main challenge that remain for the upcoming COP26. I'm very pleased that the next COP is in Glasgow, a magnificent and vibrant city where my son is studying and working hard. At least he says to me that he's working hard. I would not like to repeat things that have already been said, then I will focus on 3 main points. The first, I would like to focus on multilateral approach. Well, since I am in this job, I never saw such a multilateral integration of the classic political and diplomatic process, but also of the civil society, of the regional power, of the municipality. It's really, we have really succeeded to build an inclusive and trustful movement and process with many actors. And it is good that we are in this process also. It's a dialogue and we are criticized. It's good that we are criticized, as you underline. That's a very positive thing. Because of this dialogue and critics that we can progress, advance, and think about what we are doing step by step. My second focus would be that about the France engagement for that. Being the country of COP21 and COP21 agreement, we must set an example. We must be constantly an example. So one shot, we must be day after day an example. We have adopted a national legislation in order to meet the objective of the Paris Agreement and become carbon neutral by 2050. We have adopted a law on energy and climate in November 2019. which defines carbon neutrality. France has ensured its COVID-19 pandemic economy recovery plan with this consideration of carbon neutrality. The 100 billion recovery plan put in place in September 2020 devotes no less than 30 billion to ecological transition. The law on climate and resilience adopted by the French Parliament in August 2021 will further enable the ecological transition to become part of the daily lives of the French people and to become central to the French social and economic model. The law was the result of a democratic experiment in the forms of the Citizen Climate Convention, where 150 citizens were chosen by lottery to discuss the plan. France is also honoring its commitments on international climate finance. With the European partners and all developed countries, we are determined to continue our efforts to reach the collective target of 100 billion of climate finance in developing countries per year by 2020 until 2025. In December last year, President Macron committed to keep France climate financing at 6 billion per year between 2021 and 2025, 1/3 of which is dedicated to climate adaptation, which is a significant increase to the commitment France made at the COP21, which was 5 billion. Then we went on to 6 billion. The European Union and its member states are now the largest contributor in terms of international climate finance, with 22 billion of public climate finance to developing countries in 2019 until 2027. We expect the major developed economies to contribute their fair share to the mobilization of international climate finance. France has also committed to make the French development agency, Agence Française de Développement, the first bilateral development bank with an explicit mandate to implement the Paris Agreement, and thus to support developing countries in the design of and implementation of their climate policies, including their NDCs and long-term strategy. My third focus will be on our cooperation with Pakistan. Well, climate action is a top priority for French diplomacy in Pakistan. The French embassy engaged on a regular basis with all Pakistani stakeholders, including the federal and provincial governments, civil society, think tanks, and the private sector. Most recently, I had the chance to meet Mr. Mahmoud Akhtar Shema, country representative for the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, just ahead of the International Congress of this organization, which is taking place currently in France, in Marseille. France will support the society and is supporting the civil society organization for projects on climate change and the environment by grants. And we are very pleased to support constantly the civil society coalition for climate change for the organization of today's event. France provides also scholarship to Pakistani students under the Make Our Planet Great Again scholarship program, launched by President Macron in 2017. These scholarships are aimed at master level studies in France in Earth system, climate change and sustainability and energy transition. And then the French Development Agency, Agence Française de Développement, present in Pakistan since 2006, has offered financing and technical assistance to support the Pakistani government, in line with the Paris Agreement. Agence Française de Développement works with government partners and local authorities to develop low-carbon infrastructures and improve access to basic service. Agence Française de Développement has committed nearly 1 billion euros through 25 projects and under 3 thematic pillars. First pillar is to support the energy transition through a hydropower production project with the Water and Power Development Authority. Second pillar is to strengthen the water and sanitation sector with sovereign loans to local water and sanitation agencies, such as the one in the Faisalabad, aiming at increasing the city's water production capacity. And the third pillar is helping to guide the urban development, focusing on urban mobility and transport infrastructure in fast-growing cities such as Karachi and Peshawar, in order to limit traffic congestion, air pollution, and CO emission. The French Development Agency is also committed to support Pakistani's authority plan towards a low-carbon economy, in line with Pakistan's national determined contribution. It supports the Ministry of Climate Change for the definition of a decision-making tool to simulate economic variables in Pakistan up to 2050, under different scenarios, taking into account greenhouse gases associated emissions. As you see, this cooperation between France and Pakistan about the climate change is a major axe of our policy. It shows how the two countries have common interests and common passion for this subject. We are very pleased that Pakistan is so much engaged with us into the fight for a better planet. Thank you very much.
I would now like to request our final panelist, Ms. Aisha Khan, Chief Executive, CSCCC, to come onto the podium and give her opening statement.
I'm going to be switching my role from an organizer to a panelist now, but rest assured the content of my message remains the same. I want to start out by saying that we're living in a very altered socio-economic landscape, one that is fraught with fragility and crisis. Between climate, COVID, and conflict, the future is more uncertain than ever before. As today, we're going to go back and forward in time, covering the journey from Paris to Glasgow and beyond. I would like to refresh the memory of the audience by reminding them that from the Earth Summit that took place in 1992, that led to the formation of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, to the first conference of the parties that took place in 1996, it has taken the world 29 years to realize that climate and environment matter, and degrading one or the other puts our lives at risk. The upcoming COP is important because based on recent reports, we have only 1 decade to bring emissions under control. Otherwise, the damage will be irreversible. It's clearly visible that now we no longer have the privilege or the luxury of time on our side. Scientific consensus on this has been unanimous. What we need now is political consensus. High Commissioner Turner and other speakers have referred to the IPCC report, and I want to reiterate that it emphasizes that the option of 2 degrees is no longer an option. We have to bring temperature down to within the safe threshold of 1.5 degrees. I think the more often we repeat that, we will realize how important that is. There is another report by the Intergovernmental Panel on biodiversity and environmental services that is equally important, that makes a connection between biodiversity and climate. And that also tells us that at the current trends, rate of warming, we are going to have to see the possibility of the extinction of 1 million species. The working group of the 6th assessment report reinforces the findings of the first 2 reports and calls for urgent action. I will mention 2 other reports as their findings are closer to home, and I think they might serve as a wake-up call for us to act more urgently. Both reports are prepared by the World Bank. The first is about the climate hotspots in South Asia that puts at risk the lives of 800 million people, of which 44 million are living in 10 districts in Pakistan. The other report, more recently launched, is about the melting glaciers of the Himalayan Karakoram and the Hindu Kush and the impact of black carbon. As High Commissioner Turner has pointed out, we occupy a very vast space in the region with the largest and the densest collection of glaciers. So we need to be mindful of the changes that will take place as a result of the hydrological imbalances. We face, of course, several vulnerabilities. Some are due to the vast range of our topography, others due to social inequities, economic disparities, population growth rate, and regional geopolitical dynamics. But then there is yet another set of problems that are beyond our capacity to address and for which we have to pay a disproportionately high cost. Global warming will change the water timings, water quality, and water patterns. As a country, we rely heavily on a single river basin that derives 40% of its water from snowmelt and glacier runoff. Any drastic changes in the hydrological regime will result in either too much or too little water. Both will pose a serious human security threat to the country. As we prepare for COP26, I want to highlight that the Conference of Parties is not a bilateral agreement. It is a multilateral forum. Decisions taken here are not country specific. It is therefore important to remain engaged in a sustained manner, not just at the technical level, but at the diplomatic level as well. The rate at which the planet is warming suggests that climate diplomacy will be the most important aspect of bilateral and multilateral engagement in future. This will require careful diplomacy and inspired leadership to leverage cooperation at the regional and international level. COVID-19 has exposed our fragility and highlighted our interconnectedness. We're going to be living in a very different world, and for that, we need to realign our policies, change our behavior, and bring it in line with the new realities. COP26 offers us opportunities to overcome challenges and work together for a fair future. Thank you.
Thank you to all the panelists for giving your opening statements. Now I will hand the floor over to Ambassador Nadeem Riaz, who will be moderating this session.
Thank you very much, Zunaira. Thank you very much. What we'll do is that I will shoot the initial set of questions, if the panelists allow, at them. And after my initial questions, the floor will be open and people can ask their questions. My request to you would be that in the questions which you ask, please don't make comments, but just be very, very brief. And I would request all the panelists to turn on the mics so that you can answer the questions from where you are sitting. My first question is to the Parliamentary Secretary. You spoke at length about what we need to do in Pakistan, what the youth need to do. Would you like to elaborate on some of the steps which the government has taken to educate the youth on climate change?
Thank you so much. I think this is a evolving subject at the moment as far as youth participation, and it's for various ways to do it. I can tell you that we in the Climate Change Standing Committee are considering an idea, and we are trying to sort of make the bureaucracy come down to it, and the Higher Education Commission, and we're all sitting down, that every student in Pakistan, we branded it as T20, because you see, every youth in Pakistan is very familiar with T20. It's the cricket's, pop cricket, instant cricket, and this youth loves it. So we said that in order to get the youth involved and also to just spread a message around, create ownership, create a buzz, contribute to the goal of 10 billion tree tsunami, and put an incentive that if the student plants 20 trees within a given period of time, maybe it's a semester, maybe it's a year, we can work out the modalities, then he gets some extra credits for that in his GPA. And that idea is still on the table. Every meeting we are still discussing it, because rightly so, the education department and the stakeholders are discussing its feasibility. Everybody likes the idea. Everybody is on with it. but I think they are still discussing how to operationalize it. So that's one way of making it very. The other part that I found very exciting when I was in before we came into the government, we were in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa government, and over there, the 1 billion tree tsunami, I was in that committee of that, was also the part that every household, the young people, and they were very excited about it, and it was quite successful. The young people plant a tree in their house in the name of their parents. And it's like a tribute to the parents, and lots of enthusiasm and participation took place. So what we are looking at is basically engaging youth and letting them do it yourself. It's a DIY model where the youth plants the tree, has an incentive either because they want to contribute it to their parents or because the GPA is involved. But through that, the debate takes place, the social media gets activated, and the overall atmosphere of it's not just a one-time event which happens on the Earth Hour and the Earth Day. It's an ongoing activity which is passed on from generation to generation and becomes part of your life.
Well, it's work in progress. As everyone is saying, the diplomatic coordination required to lead into Glasgow is absolutely enormous. So President-designate Alok Sharma has written to all parties to encourage the area of consensus. Obviously, there's been detailed negotiation in the UNFCCC subsidiary bodies. There was a ministerial session in London in July, and there'll be a pre-COP in Italy at the end of September, all of which will lead into the main negotiation. The sort of 2 or 3 things that give me confidence we're on the right path. I think the statement of the G7, of course, which the UK also had the presidency of in Cornwall in July, was important. Of course, those countries, as the advanced economies, are some of the historically largest emitters, and that particular commitment to end coal power finance and see a coal transition with funds of about 2 billion, I think was quite significant if you accept my earlier observation on the transition away, or global finance away from fossil fuels. And then I think, as we've all discussed in our remarks, there have been 2 very big events through the summer. One has been the ongoing recovery from the pandemic. And I think, as you put it, Ambassador, the need to grow back greener. I think there is an acceptance, given everything the world has been through with the pandemic, that clear pink sky that Andrew saw earlier in the morning, that we can't go back to doing things how we did before. And I think in many ways, the pandemic has been a wake-up call for how we have to grow back better. So I think that is one important development. And the other is this sense that all of the panelists have said of just these extreme weather events. I mean, I think it is extraordinary the degree to which we are almost normalizing in the news the wildfires, those extreme temperatures, those flash floods, all of which, of course, have an impact on life, on livelihoods, economic impact. And to think that, that is, I think, as Aisha said, unsustainable at a 1.5 threshold, let alone a 2, I think really helps us see that the resolve has to be there through to the conflict.
Thank you very much. My next question is to my dear friend Andrea. Would you like to comment on the steps which your government has taken as a COP partner to the UK in galvanizing the support from parties and civil society actions to make the outcomes of the COP26 successful?
Well, as I anticipated, for Italy, this challenge is a vital challenge because our future, especially our beautiful countries, most of our economy will depend from that. So with the United Kingdom, we have ancient rapports of friendship. We work very well together in various sectors. So it was an excellent opportunity for us to cooperate with them. We don't forget that also the pandemic has determined serious consequences in our economy, but also is opening some challenges because last year we negotiated very hardly within the European Union, and every country will receive economic support, financial support, which is unprecedented. In the case of Italy, the authorities in Brussels committed to provide finances for more than 200 billion euros. So how we use this money? How we use this money? What is the best and most effective use? Of course, if we have to start again after the pandemic, it is important to use them in a way which is friendly with the environment and to boost the green economy. So with this philosophy, we are perfectly in line with our partner. And the idea is to promote this awareness and the fact that we cannot no more delay, we cannot more, it's a vital interest. It's a vital interest for our countries, but since indeed, as it was said, you don't give visas to the pollution to go from a country to the other, it is a global challenge. This is the message that we want to bring and to promote together. And also starting from everyday life, how when we spend money, this money must be spent in an environmentally friendly initiative. For instance, our government is giving some fiscal exemptions and some financing for those who change the heating of the house. If you have solar panels, if you have a green system which is eco-friendly, the cars, those the use of fuels which are not polluting, is something in all details. That's why our governments with the United Kingdom, as High Commissioner said, there is a very intense activity, and I think we will give an important contributions that will be appreciated and received throughout the world.
Thank you very much. My next question is for Mr. Manuel. Could you kindly tell me that what are the pledges which your government is taking to Glasgow to show its commitments to raising the level of ambitions?
We made a very strong work on the parliamentary work and governmental work to define the law corresponding to engagement in the Paris Agreement and to follow up. And I gave already the details. Maybe would you like me to repeat them?
No, it's fine. It's fine. You know, you basically reiterated what you said in your initial comments.
But the main, what I can say that again that it's not only a work from top to bottom. It's really a work from the whole people of France, in every town, in every village, almost in every street. There is action about the climate change and a better planet. And all these ideas were given, especially by you, for how to engage the youth, or how to make incentives for people. All that is very much in motion in France too.
Thank you very much. Aisha Khan, I would like to ask you that as a civil society actor, how do you see the role of civil society in How do you see the role of civil society in climate action, and how can it make its voice matter for the upcoming COP26?
Well, civil society has always played a very important role in raising environmental consciousness. And I think in more recent years, it's playing a very important role in climate advocacy. Globally, as well as in Pakistan, we see that civil society acts at two levels. One is in advocacy. It can increase the bandwidth of the message and disseminate information to a wider audience. Civil society organizations actually in Pakistan play a role without actually knowing that they are working towards climate change, because organizations that are working in social mobilization, in poverty alleviation, in disaster risk reduction, in food security, in improving agricultural practices are all actually working for climate change. They just need to realign their policies and work and connect it with climate change to make it resonate more with the communities with whom they're working. The second way for connecting is through institutional platforms. And we have two opportunities that come to my mind immediately. One is the Pakistan Climate Act, yet to be operationalized, and we have Parliamentary Secretary with us, and we can request her to take that agenda forward, because that gives a seat to civil society on the table to make their contribution. And the other one is Pakistan became a member of the Open Government Partnership in 2016 at the summit in Paris. And that has also yet to be activated. I see former Secretary Climate Change Abu Akif sitting here in the audience. And civil society had worked very closely with him to come up with 4 commitments. And I see, UK is going to be the co-chair of the steering committee of the OGP. So here is yet another opportunity where civil society can actually play a role more effectively. The last thing I want to say is that co-opting the role of civil society is hugely important, because the decisions that are taken at the policy level are difficult to implement without a buy-in from civil society. Both sides will have to make compromises, sacrifices, changes in the way they behave and relate to the environment. So if there's co-ownership and there's a sense of shared responsibility, it will be easy to take that agenda.
Thank you very much. I don't want to hog all the questions. So, could I take 2 questions from the audience? Please, Farooq Ahmed. Anybody can answer the question. Hi, Commissioner, please go ahead.
So it's a good question, but there's no short or clear answer. And I would share the view that broadly a conversation about demographics is one that we should hold centrally in our conversations about diplomacy and development globally. Any conversation about Pakistan's development trajectory has to start with 220 million people rising to 300 million plus. Half are. So I mean, these questions have surfaced in Africa. It's a huge issue. The African continent. 1 in 4 of the world's people will be African by the middle of the century. So I think they're big questions. Of course, causally, if we're looking at resource, that affects climate change. Water scarcity, part of the conversation of sense, the only cause of it. I think there's a danger in climate negotiations that almost everyone's pet issue becomes the thing they want to see climate selected. So that kind of national security. Rightly, we will see some climate issues being exacerbated and driving conflict. But it's not to say that the only lens we need to approach climate change is security. So yes, part of the conversation, but not.
Would any of the panelists like to add anything?
Well, in our experience, the rapport with the climate, environment, and population, the response is the technology and good legislation. If you go to Dubai, you have a big city and you can swim in the sea in front like in a ocean island. I mean, if there are good laws and if the technology is well used, there is no limit. We can be even much more. And this is my personal reputation. But you can see a beach in front of a city full of waste, full of garbage. You can see the same garbage to burn and create energy. So it depends how we are organized, and this is, and especially to work together, international collaboration to spread the best technologies and to convince the people that it's in their interest to use them effectively.
We have time for one more question.
Can I invest?
Yes, please.
It is a very, very important aspect. Not that it wasn't energy. Let me give you a reverse argument. Let's imagine today instead of 200 years, not repeating up to the sources are finite and it has to be more. We just run out. Second thing is not just the population, it's the quality of the capacity of that population. So with their 35 and 40% rate country, it is not just the population here, it is that rate of country and invest more population.
Yes, Arish, please go ahead.
Thermal power generation lobby. But my question is it really possible to make a switch from thermal power generation to renewable energy, because all renewable energy sources are dependent on conditions that are beyond our control. So is it really possible to make a switch from thermal power generation to renewable energy?
Please.
Yes. One is the technology. Battery generate really important point. I would like to add. I don't think that the private sector is no, the market is very private. A, legislated R&D now 58% reduction by 2020. While we have work. If you can unleash the power of those quite rapidly from those thermal sources.
I totally agree with the High Commissioner over here. I think the future is renewable energy. I think even in Pakistan, our biggest problem is not just the environmental aspect, the cost aspect, and the overall uh, damage that it has done to us, having a single source energy or largely single source energy base, is much more than just the economic growth. It has had an impact on job creation, it has had an impact on the environment, on health. And so the government, at least for its multiple damages that it has done, is looking at alternatives. You have talked about solar panels and you've talked about so many other things. I am sure that from within the youth, because every day I see a startup and I see somebody coming on some show saying that I've made this particular gadget and it doesn't need all this. So the type of young entrepreneurs and social entrepreneurs who are coming into this field, I'm very hopeful that maybe sooner than we think, we will have a largely renewable based energy production.
We have time for one last question, please. Okay. Okay. Could we have the two questions?
Rich country, and we are being urgency as a small stream to push harmful climate markets, and we are already talking to climate resilience and that. So how do you see that we can bring and implement equity investment within the COP26? How we can bring pressing on the COP26?
My name is Kumar Bond. I'm Secretary Environment Climate Change Coastal Development Department, Dr. Singh, the issue is that the signatory to the international conventions and protocols, it is the federal government, and most of the policy making is also at federal level. But the implementation is mostly with the provincial governments. We have a very good interaction with the submissions of very important countries like the United States, the UK, France, and even in Russia. The US Consulate General, there in Karachi, we had interaction with them. And but I need to stress that this interaction needs to be enhanced because the implementation of the policy, it is probably the most important. Policy, yes, it is formation, policy formulation is, yes, it is very important, but implementation, unless it is implemented properly, policies are useless. Thank you very much.
I would just like to say, yes, I agree with the Secretary, and a suggestion to the government would be that they should ensure that there is representation from the policies and subnational governments at the international climate negotiations, because it is they who need to understand the process, and they will also get exposure on how to get accredited, how to apply for the finance, and how to network over there. So probably be better motivated to come back and then implement this policy.
Yes, exactly.
much liking this nature sensitivity. But that just wrong because we are not the some years ago I was able to was about the back to see the sky of the mountain. That's a piece of
I would just say the answer to that question is fundamental conversation we're having with this format. Why I think that
Thank you very much. I know you have lots of questions, but we have really even overshot the time which was allocated for this session. I would like to thank on behalf of the organizers, all the honorable panelists for their considered views. They were really enlightening. But I think the message, if we have to take something back from this session, it is that climate change is real. It is a threat and we have to deal with it. And secondly, nations have to work together. They have to go to COP26 with an open mind and with figures, because at this particular event, what we are going to decide, that is going to be important for the next 50 years, for the next 100 years, because you cannot allow climate change to increase global temperatures, because if there is an increase in temperature, it will become more and more difficult. And one thing which I'm sure will also come out, that when there are problems due to climate, there is food shortage, it also leads to security related issues. So I think these are important challenges which we must keep in mind. These are the challenges which the world faces, and I don't think any country or a group of countries working together can resolve them. It has to be an effort in which all countries collaborate with one another. And what the High Commissioner said, one of the last words which he said, we are looking at partnerships, because that is what is required to take things forward. Thank you very much. Thank you for a very, very patient listening. Once again, I would like to thank the panelists, and we'll take a short break for tea, and then we reconvene here after 15 minutes. Well, maybe 20 minutes. Okay, thank you very much.
Welcome to the afternoon session, everyone. This second session is Framing Pakistan's Agenda at COP26. The moderator is Dr. Hina Aslam, who is a research fellow at STPI. I would now request our moderator and our panelists to please take the stage and take their seats, and including Ambassador Shafkat Kakakhel, who will be giving closing remarks. We would request you to sit on the stage as well as part of the panel. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the introduction. So I'll be moderating this session on framing Pakistan's agenda at COP26. To begin with, we have a keynote speech from Malik Amin Aslam, Special Assistant to the Prime Minister on Climate Change, currently serving as Prime Minister's Special Assistant, as well as honorary serving as the elected Global Vice President of IUCN. He has previously chaired the flagship Green Growth Initiative for the KPK in Pakistan that also included the mass afforestation billion tree tsunami project. We shall be able to have his video to be played because he's out of country. So I would request the IT team to kindly. Thank you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I would like to first of all thank the Civil Society Coalition on Climate Change, STPI, and the Institute for Regional Studies for organizing this event on pre-COP26 negotiations. I would apologize for not being there with you, but I'm presently at the World Conservation Congress in Marseille. But I think this is a very well-timed initiative. Pakistan is getting ready to present its case in a very strong way at COP26. What is Pakistan's case? Pakistan's case is that we are less than 1% of the global emissions, so we're not a major contributor to climate change, but we are one of the most affected countries because of climate change. We are really at the front lines of the climate change impacts in the world. We have been on the top 10 list for the last 10 years. And this year, we've been categorized as one of the 3 countries which is continuously impacted by climate change. Now, what does it mean for COP26? I think for COP26, what is important is to give the message that Pakistan is one of the responsible countries which, though affected by climate change in an unjust manner, is still willing to be a part of the solution to climate change and not add to the problem. And we are going to do this with a very clear vision on both the energy side and the forestry side. And this is not just talk, but this is actual action on the ground that Pakistan is taking. On the forestry or the carbon sequestration side, we have the 10 billion tree tsunami project going on, which is one of the largest and most aggressive projects for afforestation and the protection of natural forests in the world. It has been globally recognized all over. We are championing that project for Pakistan's own future, for Pakistan's own sake, but also for the world, because it sequesters carbon right from the mangroves to the alpine forest, to the scrub forest, the riverine forest, the urban forest. It has all parts in it, and it is doing its bit for the world. We're going to take that project to COP26 with ground data to present something as positive climate action. Similarly, we are expanding our protected areas in Pakistan, which are expanding at a very fast rate. In the last 12 months, we have announced 15 new national parks all over Pakistan. These wilderness areas also sequester carbon and act as carbon sinks. At the same time, all of these are nature-based solutions. They are solutions in which we put our trust in nature and let nature fight climate change. So I think this is what the message is from Pakistan. Another project, Recharge Pakistan, which we are about to start, is going to turn a crisis into an opportunity. The flood water that goes through Pakistan almost every year, we're going to use that flood water, divert it to recharge our wetlands and recharge our groundwater aquifer system. Again, it's a positive message for the world. Similarly, on the energy side, Pakistan is going with clear targets that we want to go towards clean energy. And we want to convert 60% of our energy onto clean energy resources by 2030. We want to convert 30% of our vehicles to electric vehicles by 2030. And we've already taken steps for that. We've announced our EV policy. We have shelved projects based on coal, which have now been taken over by hydro projects. And we have also announced that we are not. So this is a very strong case that Pakistan is going to take forward on nature-based solutions, on clean energy, and on shifting away from coal towards hydro. And we're doing something very exciting also, but I will not disclose it right now. I will disclose it when the timing is right for that. But it is along the same philosophy that I've just discussed over here. All of this is also being put into our NDC, which is being revised as we speak and will be announced very soon. But it will reflect all these things which have occurred after 2016 when the first NDC was put forward. And I can say today that we are already 8% below the business as usual pathway for emissions growth that we had given in our original NDC. So it's quite clear that Pakistan will go with a positive message, and we will go with a message for fostering and furthering climate action across all the countries like Pakistan is. I think it's time to stop talking on climate change and start acting. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. With this, let me introduce the honorable panelists that we have on the stage. To begin with, we have Mr. Najee Menhassan, the country director for Pakistan for the South Asia region at World Bank Group. Prior to this, he was the Equitable Growth Finance and Institutions EFI regional director for Middle East and North Africa region, and has also worked as a practice manager in trade and competitiveness global practice of World Bank Group. Welcome to the session. Next, we have our honorable chairperson of the STPI's Board of Governors, Ambassador Shafkat Kakakil. He has worked as a Deputy Executive Director of United Nations Environment Program and Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations. He was elected as a President of the UN Environment Program Governing Council and was also the Chief Negotiator for G77 countries in preparatory meetings of the Second World Summit on Human Settlements. Welcome to the session, sir. Then we have Dr. Abid Sulehi, who is Executive Director, Sustainable Development Policy Institute. He's a social policy analyst and development practitioner with a PhD in food security from University of Greenwich, United Kingdom. Welcome to the session, sir. Then we have Ms. Annabelle Gary. She's heading the DFID, now FCDO, Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. Welcome, madam, to the session. So we have another keynote that I would like to request from Mr. Najee to kindly, to kindly come on the roster, please. Yes, thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. I'll be short. I didn't know this was a keynote. I think most interesting will be the exchanges and the questions. And in view of this event, and I'm very happy to be here. Sorry, I missed most of the first session. This is I don't think I need to convince anyone how critical this agenda is. Yesterday, my team prepared talking points, and I told them, give me numbers. So I'm gonna more numbers. I'm gonna bore you with a few numbers, not to convince you of how critical it is this agenda for Pakistan, but I think it's always a good reminder of how severe are the issues, the climate issues that Pakistan is facing as in other countries. When we look at the data on extreme weather and climate-related events for the past 30 years, between 1990 and 2018, Pakistan ranks 5th in the world in the countries most affected by these events. And there's it's estimated that today 50 million Pakistanis live in areas which will turn into climate hotspots by 2050. The magnitude of the adaptation agenda that's ahead of us in Pakistan. And floods alone, we're sadly reminded of that regularly, including today in Rawalpindi. Floods alone affect 3 million people annually, and we estimate that they will start generating between 1.3 and 1.8 billion dollars of losses every year for Pakistan. And in addition to floods, there's many parts of Pakistan, as you know, are affected by drought. Again, during this time period, 58 that I mentioned earlier, 58 districts in the country were affected by droughts across provinces, particularly Sindh, South Punjab, and Balochistan. The other agenda that's linked to the climate agenda, in which we want to focus increasingly as the World Bank in our program, is water use. It is expected that water demand will be up by 15% by 2047 on the 100th year of anniversary of the Republic. But that's just caused by climate change and increased temperatures. And domestic demand and industrial demand will grow by another 58% by this timeline. And unfortunately, today, if you look at the different measures of how you can measure the effectiveness by which water is being used in agriculture, which is the biggest consumer in the country, it today generates 30 cents, US cents per cubic meter. And that's among the lowest in the world in terms of the efficacy of water use. The water use efficacy in agriculture will be one of the areas with human development and girls' education where we expect our portfolio to grow the most in the coming years. And it is obviously linked to the central in the climate agenda. So over the past several years, the government has launched a number of important initiatives and programs, and Advisor Malik just reminded us of this, including the 10 billion tree tsunami initiatives, economic system restoration initiative, which we are supporting with an ongoing project with the Ministry of Climate Change and the NDMA in terms of ecosystem restoration. It's about $200 million dedicated to that, and we're looking forward to faster implementation, given the urgency of the adaptation agenda and the restoration agenda. And we expect this momentum and this growth of our portfolio in climate-related topics, including water, including renewable energy, comes at the right time because of the ambition of Pakistan, just expressed by the advisor in terms of the revised NDCs that will be presented at COP26. So this is all very timely, and we think Pakistan is playing a global leadership role in this area. I'm very much looking forward to the updated and revised NDCs, because the ambition is to articulate our own very ambitious targets around mitigation and even GHG emissions reduction, even if Pakistan is indeed quite small contributor globally, less than 1%. But in terms of adaptation, technology transfer, including in water and agriculture, it will be these updated revised NDCs will be absolutely critical, and we will be supporting the government in the implementation and in continuing policy reforms as well to support this agenda, including in energy, where we are very active in the renewable energy and related policy reforms, but also transport, industry, waste management, agriculture, and water use, as well as forestry. In terms of our program, and I'll end with that, last year, the World Bank committed $3.7 billion in both IDA, which is concessional lending, and there's grant components, as well as IBRD lending to Pakistan. That was the highest, among the highest in the world in terms of portfolio. And what's interesting beyond the number is that 44% of these new engagements have climate components and climate, what we call climate co-benefits, and they contribute to the climate agenda. Our corporate objective committed to our board is 35% that of our lending should be related to climate. In Pakistan, we are already at 44%. So, and we can only achieve these numbers when we have a government that wants climate-related projects, and it is definitely the case. I was very happy to learn that SDPI was partnering with us in the production of a new report. We do lots of reports. I hope they're being read, called the Climate Change Development Report. Pakistan is among, I think, 8 or 9 countries globally which will benefit from this new work that we want. We don't want to have a report that we write. We would like partners like SDPI to be fully involved in it. So you can, Pakistan can count on the continued World Bank support, but most importantly, I'd like to hear from other panelists and looking forward to the open discussion and Q&A. I think it's more important than a speech. Thank you very much. Looking forward to the discussion.
Let's move on to the panel discussion and the questions I would like to begin with. Ms. Annabel Gary, if I could pose a question on the key areas in which FCDO can help Pakistan meet its adaptation and mitigation targets. Yes. We have started a panel discussion, so we're just
Okay, so no opening remarks.
Thank you.
Okay. So yeah, I think for us as the UK, obviously the upcoming COP has been really fantastic as an impetus for us to, if we're going to host, we have to show that we are stepping up ourselves. And you heard earlier about some of the domestic commitments that the UK has made. And for us here in Pakistan, it really put into sharp focus that while we have done very well on some aspects of the development agenda, this is one which has been lagging. So we're definitely capitalizing on the opportunity of the interest in climate, the greater ability to do work on climate because of the availability of climate financing and the total invention of that. So looking at what that specifically means, one of the areas which we've already agreed with the government of starting to work on is water governance, in fact, and we'll be doing that, among others, in partnership with the World Bank. But it's clear that water, we saw from the previous session when we were talking about the risks to the country's glacial melt and the criticality of water really to lives and livelihoods, that water use at the moment is extremely inequitable, inefficient. Much water is wasted, and so that's a very important area. Another one is really trying to work with the authorities here to get out of a constant cycle of reacting to humanitarian crises, the chronic crises that are suffered by those who are at the most vulnerable end of society here, and to be much more serious about building resilience. We've done some of that, but we're definitely looking forward to redoubling efforts on that. And then I think another area to mention that's really important is collaboration with private sector. It was mentioned before in the previous, but a challenge as big as this is not going to be met by state funding. It just isn't. And one of the things that we're doing at the moment, taking advantage of COP again, is this Race to Zero initiative. So we're partnering with some of the biggest companies, and the High Commissioner referred to it in his remarks. But it's actually, if people are not aware, some of your companies are doing very, very inspiring work, setting up sub-companies in their groups, which are specifically on renewable energy, on wind. That's one example I know, moving entirely to solar, And they see this not only as an opportunity to export more easily to the Western and international markets who are looking for that, but also the fantastic opportunity to create pride in the job, in the environment, in the community. So that's an area which we're keen to support, encourage, pull more of in terms of commitments ahead of COP.
Thank you so much. Moving on, I would like to request Mr. Shafkat Kaktil on if you could tell us about what could be the critical environmental issues that must be addressed for this COP26. Yeah. So you can comment on that. Use some.
Well, I'd like to, at the outset, commend and thank SDPI, Civil Society Coalition, I have problems.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now? Is it okay? What could be the critical environmental issues that could be addressed for COP26 for Pakistan?
Difficult, to answer in one word, but basically there are the most critical question for COP21, which makes it an important conference, is whether governments will respond to the verdict of the scientific community on the seriousness of climate change. The seriousness of climate change has been corroborated by two principal sources: the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and the extreme events. There have been hundreds of extreme events in all parts of the world. Several hundred incidents of ocean hurricanes, floods, droughts, forest fires, floods in Karachi and elsewhere, and they have caused massive destruction. The scientific evidence was, in fact, it's in my presentation also, in just last month, in August. The IPCC said, look, we have, since the 1800s, emitted 2.4 we have inducted massive quantities of carbon. And we are left with a very small quantity before we run out of the budget. And unless drastic cuts are made, we are headed for a temperature increase of at least 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2050 and 2 degrees Celsius. Now, any warming beyond 2 Celsius will make life impossible for humans and others. So, as I said, how do governments respond? In Glasgow, negotiators and leaders will have to discuss a new generation of commitments by country. And they will have to see whether these commitments are adequate, and if they are not, how to scale them up. So the most important issue today facing humankind is to prevent the further exacerbation of climate change, for which the solution mainly lies in changing our lifestyle, reducing our emissions, and replacing them by renewable energy, stopping deforestation and degradation, and have a nature-based approach to life.
Thank you so much, Shafqat Saab. I've also been told we are joined by Director General, Ministry of Climate Change, Mr. Irfan Tariq. He has joined us virtually. Not yet? Sure. So I would like to move on to Dr. Abid Suleri. Dr. Abid, you sit in a Prime Minister Economic Advisory Council, and you're also a member of Board of Directors of Natural Disasters Risk Management Relief Fund. Being part of these different policy-making forums, can you shed some light on government's preparedness to cope against climate change?
Thank you. Even as a spectator, external spectator and representative of civil society in these policy-making forums, I can see the seriousness in this government towards coping the negative impacts of climate change and being better prepared, at least for COP26. Being one of the regular participants of different COPs, when I look at the level of preparedness at ministry this time, I feel that they are technically more equipped. Similarly, Prime Minister, more than once, almost in all policy-making forums, he keeps on talking about his pledge towards renewable energy. He keeps on talking about afforestation and, of course, puts the relevant ministries and departments to task. Looking at National Disaster Risk Management Fund, again, like NCOC, which I can give the analogy that how effective the NCOC had been to contain the negative impacts of COVID in this country, being a centralized one-window forum. Similarly, this NDRMF, this is a one-window fund for disaster preparedness, for disaster adaptation, for disaster mitigation. And again, thanks to World Bank and Asian Development Bank for coming forward and providing some endowments for the fund. So in nutshell, I would say that now the policies, they are more integrated towards combating the negative impacts of climate change. It's still not there where we should have been, but it's comparatively better than where we were. And I'll also share with the audience that the chairman of Senate, he has already approved in principle the idea of establishing a renewable energy caucus in the parliament. We had been working on it, trying to have across political spectrum a caucus where all the parliamentarians, they could work on green and clean energy. And this issue was highlighted in the first panel as well, the coal-based energy projects in Pakistan and how they can negatively affect. So there would be, for the first time, and of course, the relevant authorities, they would announce it, but I can tell you that in principle, the chairman Senate, he has agreed to establish this green and clean energy caucus in the parliament. So from these indicators, I would say that this government is quite committed towards handling climate change issues.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abid. And I think with this, I could link it up to the role of World Bank development policy financing in creating the opportunities for for a green and inclusive economic development, such as clean energy transition, phasing down coal, upscaling renewables, and what steps to make a climate smart policy a lending rule. So over to you, Mr. Nigel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So already mentioned that between more than 40%, 44% of our new lending has gone into climate-related activities. In terms of your question on the policy lending, just so that everyone has the same information, these are budget support operations, where we support directly the budget of the federal government um, in support of certain reforms in certain areas. And we have had a loan approved, a budget support loan approved in the energy sector in end of June, which is very much at the heart of supporting reforms to enable the energy transition towards cleaner energy and the target of reaching 60% at least of clean energy in the energy mix. So part of the policy reforms that we support involve increased efficiency of the energy sector in terms of transmission, distribution, reducing the cost of energy. And in the medium term, this cannot be done overnight, but the number one channel to reduce the cost of energy is to use cleaner and cheaper energy. There's enough evidence now that the transition out of the carbon-based energy makes sense financially. We are supporting reforms in that direction. And by the way, I'd like to commend the government on the Council of Common Interest, which met Monday and approved the ICGEP, which is the indicative capacity generation plan. I forgot what the E is for, expansion plan. So it's basically a 2030 plan that commits the government and the provinces into adopting cheapest mode of energy, the cleanest, and to also have open bidding for most projects, and that's a big step. In the previous session, there was a discussion in the Q&A on the provincial role versus federal, and having the Council of Common Interest, which is the highest constitutional body, agree between federal and provinces on the plan going forward is absolutely critical on renewable energy, and we've been supporting this. So our policy operation and energy, to summarize, very focused on the renewable energy. There's also the National Electricity Plan. All of this is part of the institutional and legal construct and commit that implements the commitments of the government. So we're happy to see progress, but it is not a one-shot thing. Implementation will be tricky, and we'll continue to support implementation on policy reforms, and at the same time in the investment. We are supporting hydropower in this area, and solar as well, and we'll continue to do so. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Going back to Ms. Annabel on the Energy Transition Council that has been formed by the UK government and Pakistan being one of the members, would you like to elaborate some of the progress that has been done on that front so far? And how would you like to comment on that? Thank you.
Thank you. I think it will be good once the colleague from the ministry is here can comment in more detail from their perspective, but we're certainly enthusiastic of the idea, and I think the potential is really great, and actually in some senses Pakistan can take advantage of the fact that things don't work perhaps as functionally as they should in the energy sector. It's very interesting. I did a visit down to Kohat a couple of months ago, and it was really interesting going on the road out of Peshawar. You saw suddenly solar everywhere, and so you can see in patches where the system is not providing that citizens are making their own transition. So I think having this body who can sort of have the overview will be really important. But the potential for leapfrogging, I think, is really an important one, and using the new technologies available. And I know we have colleagues here from Sindh, and some of the issues have a different kind of characteristic, again, in different parts of the country, and there are reasons for that. But I think we can also focus on the opportunities, you know, in Sindh, wind power, etc. So if this will give added impetus, then it should be very helpful.
Thank you so much, certainly. And we have also had a chance to read the VRE report of the World Bank Group that has exactly identified the potential of solar and wind in Pakistan and how it could save up around 5 billion for Pakistan in upcoming years. Linking up to again to the emission side and of course the climate change perspective. If I could ask Dr. Abid, we know that the renewable has a lot of potential, but what has been the major challenges so far in achieving the real implementation of these sources, and how the country is still investing in the coal power plants and using
Well, I think the real challenge is renegotiating some of those agreements. We know that either government-owned funded projects or some of the projects which were funded by some multilaterals, so IPPs, they have the guarantees from the government. Those can be, if one terminate them unilaterally, those can be challenged in the international courts of arbitration. So government of Pakistan is trying to negotiate with IPPs while it's negotiating the dollar indexing, the price in dollars, and also some of the profit margin. It has also come up with this idea whereby different power producers, those would be given order for energy on the basis of merit, and this merit list, if this formula which is already approved by the Provincial Coordination Ministry, there is a provision that if we have some sort of clean and green energy component at the cleaner fuel, then perhaps one can alter with this merit list. Otherwise, we will have to negotiate with bilaterally, especially with China, and try to convince it that we should be able to phase out some of the coal-powered plants, as well as some of the government-owned funded plants. But then the real question is, and I think that's where COP26 becomes important, and perhaps Annabelle can educate us, that if governments goes this far, what is it that it will get in return? So let's say, hypothetically speaking, if today government plans that all the 4 coal-based power plants, those would be rolled back, we will be facing the litigation, whatever, will we be able to get some sort of technical or financial support to install the renewable plants? And that's where I think UK perhaps has this energy transition, I think a forum or an energy transition program. So I hope that some sort of bilateral discussion would be going on. But right now, moving back from coal unilaterally, that would be legally difficult. But yes, government does have this plan to keep on increasing the share of renewables in energy generation.
Thank you, Dr. Abid. I think Shafqat Saab would like to add something.
But the subject of energy is at the heart of climate change because it's the greenhouse gas emissions based on fossil fuels that created the problem of climate. And for the answer to climate change lies in substituting dirty energy, fossil fuel-based energy by clean energy, wind, solar, geothermal, biomass, and others. Now, the Pakistani energy landscape has both negative and positive aspects. The most unfortunate and negative aspect is the introduction of coal-based power. We did not have, we had insignificant emissions from coal, which were basically the kilns, factories which make bricks, and they produce negligible quantities of carbon until 2000, until recently, until today. Now, it's from 2008 until now, successive governments have been trying to resolve the climate, the deficiencies, shortage of industry. We still have 25 million people with no access to reliable energy. So they went absolutely crazy in search of electricity. And in CPEC, unfortunately, very unfortunately, we decided to request the Chinese to also fund coal-based projects. And with just a few projects, the share of coal in our energy mix has gone up to 10%. And the health consequences and the consequences of contamination of air and water is phenomenal. Now, as far as this government is concerned, Malakabina Aslam Khan has been saying that the government has succeeded in getting Chinese approval for substituting two large projects, 800 megawatts, from coal to hydro. But we don't know all the details. On the positive side, I think the most significant initiative is the new Alternative and Renewable Energy Development Policy, 2019-2020. The remarkable quality, and the World Bank is involved, the remarkable feature of this policy is that the government only has to identify the project, how many megawatts, depending on the capacity of the grid, and private sector will come forward with offers. India is doing it, and with highly encouraging results. And the World Bank has actually agreed to organize the international auction. So there will be a kind of international auction at which we hope. As far as the potential of renewable energy is concerned, we have a remarkable report by the Abu Dhabi-based ARENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency. It's available on the website, and it says that Pakistan has tremendous potential, particularly of solar, all over Pakistan. Wind confined to, there is a wind corridor in Sindh, with about the capacity between 18,000 and 24,000 megawatts. Geothermal is still not identified. Biomass already, our sugar mills are producing. So what is the future of clean energy? It lies in the political will as well as the institutions. The institutions which are called upon to implement policies and programs.
Thank you so much. Ms. Annabelle, would you like to have some comment on what Dr. Abid has just elaborated on one of the very interesting points on if Pakistan would like to, let's say, halt all the or back off all the coal power plants, how would UK government would be able to address that, or would be able to probably help and support Pakistan in terms of rolling them out? Any comments?
Yeah, I think, obviously that there's partnerships existing, already, and at the moment what we're doing is not only here but globally identifying where there's agreement and potential, and I think there's one of the areas is looking at the sort of readiness of countries to receive climate finance. So the sort of environment in the country and that policy side is something that is pretty important and requires attention. But these are all areas that the UK is certainly willing to step into, and if already good progress is being made towards that very, very ambitious target on climate financing. So I'm optimistic, and particularly given some of what I've seen that's already happening here. But there's definitely more to do to prepare the ground, I think, at the moment, because you see in Pakistan as we've heard this morning, are very, very strong on some aspects and really leading on nature-based, for example. But in the area of energy, there's some complicated politics. And while there are opportunities, there are also real challenges. So it's that mixture of being open to partnership, but also the readiness of the system here to really use that finance to maximum effect.
Thank you so much. I think we have Mr. Irfan Tariq, DG Environment and Climate Change from Ministry. And if we could ask him about the broad outline of the NDCs that Pakistan will be taking to Glasgow this year, and tell us a little bit more about the current status of National Action Plan, as well as the progress made on the process of revision of National Climate Change Policy, please. Can you hear us, sir?
I can hear you very well. I hope you can hear me and see me. All right. Thank you very much. And Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Very good morning to colleagues here in CSCCC, and thank you very much for this opportunity. As per your question, let me update you on the two things you have just asked about the National Climate Change Policy and the National Action Plan. You would recall that Pakistan was amongst one of the few countries, the first countries to develop their National Climate Change Policy in 2012, which was approved by the Cabinet. Since 2012, there have been major happenings, including the Paris Agreement and number of other initiatives which directly or indirectly have impact on climate change. In order to capture all the new events and new dimensions of our obligations, we decided to update this policy document. It is currently in the very mature stage. The final draft has been submitted to the minister for approval, and I think within a few days time we'll be able to launch our new climate change policy, which will contain elements of Paris Agreement and a number of other initiatives. Question regarding action plan, I suppose, has got two dimensions: action plan to implement the National Climate Change Policy, and the action plan which is termed as nationally determined contributions. So the action plan for the policy would be subsequently developed after finalizing the policy, whereas the nationally determined contributions, we adopted a very comprehensive process to update the NDCs, which lasted for more than 6, 7, 8 months. The consultative process was carried out by two major organizations: the Flood Commission, which was responsible for the adaptation side, and the Energy Ministry for the mitigation side. And the consultation process included provinces, federal government, academia, experts, and whoever was knowledgeable contributed to those discussions. Based on those discussions, which had multiple working groups, the adaptation committee and the mitigation committee had finalized their recommendations and submitted to us. We are right now in the process of finalizing the first draft of these NDCs. And let me add that this time, as we get our experience gets richer, this time the NDCs would be very comprehensive. They would contain a lot of new elements, and it would be a whole of society type of approach. the new elements would contain not only just the gender aspects and the and other related youth aspects, but also new development sectors which have yet to be, tapped for and linked with climate change. So we hope that we'll be able to finalize them very shortly and submit them to the UNFCCC Secretariat. Please also understand that these also require approval from very higher level, and before that approval, we had to convene the steering committee, which comprises of multiple ministries and provinces, to have them on board for the final approval. So I would stop here. If there are any questions, I would be happy to answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Would you like to say something? Yes.
Exactly what you are doing within it. Local pollutants, international pollutants, what are future strategies? I have not heard anything about it. So what the new policy encompasses, please enlighten us a little bit.
Yes, Mr. Irfan, sir, would you like to comment on the question of what the new policy is encompassing? What are the pollutants that are being added? What are the key features? Sorry, to Sir Irfan Tariq from Ministry of Climate Change. Can you hear us, sir? We can't. Your mic is mute. Could you please unmute yourself?
Can you kindly repeat? Sorry for this. Can you kindly repeat the question?
So,
I can't get you. Sorry.
Sir, I'm very happy
Or maybe
to
if you
learn
can.
from you that new climate change policy would be available shortly. However, what that climate change policy encompasses. For example, our cities have become one of the most polluted cities in the world, like Lahore, Karachi. There are the local pollutants. I don't see and hear from anybody what we are doing about it. Does your new policy contain anything with regard to the mitigation measures that you are taking here? Please enlighten us.
So what I get from your question is regarding cities of Karachi and Lahore being polluted by multiple sources. What I can very confidently say is that there are new elements in the policy which address issues related to short-lived climate pollutants, which have a very obvious sort of impact on cities like Lahore. And yes, surely this would be contained in the new climate change policy. There was a mention in the previous policy as well, but this time it's going to be quite clear and action oriented. I don't know if I fully answer your question, but this is what I got from your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Irfan Saab. I would like to move on to next question to Mr. Najee on the ecosystem restoration program that WB is World Bank is funding. What is the distribution and the delivery mechanism, and how effectively has it been implemented so far in Pakistan? And has there been any plans for expanding the support for ecosystem restoration?
So, thank you. So as a reminder, the government of Pakistan launched its ecosystem restoration initiative during the COP25, between adaptation, mitigation, and ecosystem restoration. We have a project supporting the restoration plan And we've allocated 120 million. The project is called International Climate Services. The total is 200 million. 120 million has been allocated for the ESRI. It's anchored with the Ministry of Climate Change and the implementation. It's coming to a question through the NDRMA, the National Disaster Risk Management Fund. And basically, the principle is that they receive the calls for proposals for initiatives to promoting nature-based solutions, climate smart technology, getting community resistance, working on solutions for ecosystem restoration. And we have the NDRMF has received so far a number of proposals, and we recently approved $45 million number of local initiatives.
Bangladesh.
So we're happy to see progress.
Very pleasant to with you on getting more detailed guidance.
It will depend on how fast the first tranche of $45 million for local initiatives for restoration are implemented. If they're implemented fast and effectively and we see results, we could definitely consider increasing the allocation, which is today, as I said, so we'll see over the coming year maybe how these projects are implemented. So
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. I would like to move on again to Ms. Annabelle on how the UK government is taking special reference to gender, youth, society, civil society, and marginalized communities to ensure that climate conversations at COP26 are inclusive, participatory, and climate action has to be transparent and broad-based.
Thank you for the question. So, as you'd probably expect, the UK is committed to an inclusive presidency, recognizing that unless it is inclusive, the legitimacy and also the effectiveness of the whole thing will be undermined. So we're very keen to encourage non-state actors, as many as possible, to join the Race to Resilience campaign, which aims to build the resilience of 4 billion people from vulnerable groups and communities to climate risks by 2030. So that's a clear opportunity for civil society here in Pakistan, which, as we know and as we've discussed in many forums, are highly vulnerable and in a chronic manner. So that's one important opportunity that we're promoting, and is an opportunity here. And then lobbying for the gender action plan. I think one of the previous speakers maybe hadn't realized about that, but the plan was agreed at COP25. And so there are various elements to this. One is including appointing a national gender and climate change focal point, incorporating gender equality into domestic climate action, as well as climate financing. By incorporating it as a primary or secondary goal. So gender as an important theme. And then youth have been referred to this morning, and I'm conscious that most of us in this room probably, although we may think of ourselves as young, perhaps not quite youth. And so supporting youth engagement as the UNGO youth, which is the youth constituency to the UNFCCC, supporting youth for called Youth for Climate 2021 initiative. There's the Driving Ambition event in Milan in September, which I think may have been mentioned by the Italian colleague, and then the Conference of Youth, specific Conference of Youth, COY 16 in Glasgow in October. So there's quite a number of opportunities for youth organisations, again, here in Pakistan to plug into that, and we really hope that that will happen.
Thank you so much. With this, I would like to thank you to all of the esteemed panelists who have joined us for this session and very pertinent insights. I would like to give a floor to the audience now for the questions. So if you could kindly raise your hands and we could begin from the first row. Kindly, sir, mention your name and who to address the question to.
My name is Imran Nadeem. I'm coming from Gilgit-Baltistan, a social worker. Gilgit-Baltistan is the most affected and vulnerable area in terms of climate change. Less snow falling, and it's resulting less water, glaciers are melting. The threat is tourism, especially the trekkers, expeditions left in the garbage dumping, and CPEC, more vehicles, transportations. These are the threats. My question to all of these panelists, especially Larissa being the government, somehow he is involved in the government. So is there any plan of carrying out fruitful survey? How to make these glaciers protect or preserving less melting instead of this only tree plantation? Is there any plan or any plan of working with the local community or the civil society for the sustainable development of these the world highest water reservoirs?
Thank you. Dr. Abid, would you like to? Dr. Irfan Tariq, if he's online with us. Can you hear us, sir? Irfan sir, can you hear us?
If we can, perhaps due to some connectivity issue here, I can attempt addressing it. Of course, it's the government's prerogative to inform about government's information. But yes, one is mindful of the fact that Gilgit-Baltistan is one of the region which is most vulnerable, especially when we are talking of rising temperature. There are certain positive aspects of it, especially in northern areas in Baltistan, and that is from food security and agroclimatic zoning, that some of the crops now, as the temperature is increasing in global north as well as in our northern areas, we will have slightly prolonged crop growing season, but that of course doesn't compensate for all the vulnerabilities that you have very rightly pointed out. Government, I know they're working on preparing some sort of climate change assessment. So for their pre-COP preparation, one of the things that they have been quite actively doing that was to do some sort of assessment of vulnerabilities in different regions, and on the basis of those vulnerabilities, come up with this climate change policy plan. So it was a pre-policy work that the government was engaged in, and I hope that the new climate change policy, perhaps it addresses some of the concerns that you have mentioned.
Thank you, Dr. Abid. Any other question, please?
Hello. I have a comment and then a question. My comment is referred to Larissa. When you were planning for the coal-fired power projects, we were told that these would be coming with the new technologies, whereby the pollutants would be curtailed and would not be allowed to go in the air. Now, from the discussion, I get the feeling as if all is bad, which I don't think that all is bad. We need to identify which are the more pollutants and which are the less pollutants. And thereby then we get into negotiation. I would like to have a comment from your side, but let me
ask the question that is from the panel. You see, Pakistan is going to this conference being the least pollutant country in the world as far as the world pollutants are concerned, that is CO2. Pakistan contribution is less than 1%, while our problem is the local pollutants like sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxide, which has localized impact. I want to know what are we planning in the new policy, because climate change is going to affect us, but in the long term. The greenhouse gases emission need to be controlled, but our footprint is very little, minuscule in that. Our real problem is the sulfate and the nitro oxide. So I would like to learn from the panel, and I'm very happy to learn from the World Bank that out of the 3.7 billion, 44% has been being allocated for development of strategies and programs for mitigation of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone would like to? I'm sure, probably if we could move on to the...
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you very much for this very interesting initiative. My name is Emanuela Benigni. I'm the director of the Italian Agency for Development Cooperation. So I'm very happy to listen to what the co-chair of the UK is doing and the FCDO, and also to whatever is really extremely dynamic in this sector since maybe the 90s. Pakistan has really done a lot of work. I have very many things to ask and comment on. What I would like to focalize is on youth. I think it's a very important issue that has been highlighted in the previous panel. So the Italian corporation is launching now a project which is called Glaciers and Students with the government of Pakistan, and the idea is to complete the inventory of the glaciers and to look at the scientific level with universities, with institutions, exactly what can be done with the results of this continuous monitoring, and also how to enhance the resilience of population, how all the different kind of, let's say, habits can really be, let's say, affected, but also how to adjust to it. And also we have been launching a group that has been working already of youth communicators for development in remote communities that are mainly dealing with climate change. And the third thing is we are going to launch a project on radio education that is going to look partly into climate. And this is an idea that I got from this field in Africa a long time ago, which is it was a very interesting example. So what I think it's important is, of course, the policies that the government can really put in place and apply, and also see what has been done also in Pakistan, how the civil society, with exactly the work that you are doing, can really endorse and empower itself in order to change at the level that is the citizen level. Of course, the citizens are going ahead, of course. So what could be interesting is to see how we can participate all together in a kind of a platform where youth can really have most of the information, and why not the scientific information as well, because they deserve it, and how this can really have an impact on the kind of policies that the government wants to put into place. And this, of course, with a kind of eye of kind of a broader partnership at another multilateral level. So this is just the kind of a challenge. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your very useful comments. Any other question we have from the audience, please, on that side? The second row.
Arif Jabbar, I'm the country director of WaterAid. The world is actually fed by small farmers, and when you look at the impact of climate change, the biggest impact is on these small farmers, whether it's drought or flooding, or in the long run as well, in terms of the changing weather patterns, etc. I'm just wondering whether in COP26 there is discussion and focus on issues of small farmers and how we can focus on them in terms of adaptation. And also, could this be an opportunity for countries like Pakistan, whose economies are predominantly agrarian, to work with other countries in carving out actually in terms of money and technologies for working on issues, or basically on supporting small farmers on how to deal with the effects of climate change. Thank you.
Ms. Annabelle, if you would like to comment on that, please.
So in general, in terms of the priorities, this, the building resilience and supporting working in partnership with countries that need that. So that theme in general is there very, very strongly. I'm afraid I can't recall off the top of my head the detail of the program. I think there is a stream as well on agriculture, but I don't know if anyone in the audience is better versed with the latest program. But over the sort of full series outside of the shorter leaders events, there are themed days and themes within the day. So I'm pretty sure that we'll be looking at that question there from those two acts, the sectoral food production angle as well as the resilience livelihoods angle. But I agree with you, it's incredibly important.
Thank you. If we could just take one last question from Sir, and then we can move on to the concluding remarks.
Thank you very much. In Pakistan, almost rice is cultivated on 3 million hectares of land. And rice is a crop which is producing high methane. So is there any recommendations in the new policy how to control, how to bring dry rice instead of irrigated rice? In several countries, we are producing rice without water, and instead of we put rice for continuously in the beginning for shape of paddy for 27 days. There is no need for such interventions because new techniques have already in the system. My second part of the question is that country has almost more than 120 million livestock, and out of 120 million livestock, 50 million are large ruminants, buffaloes and cows. So these both large ruminants are producing high quantity of methane. So there should be some techniques to control the quality of the cattle and reduce the number of large ruminants. So what agriculture has in future? Otherwise, the temperature will rise tremendously. Now we have seen glaciers are there and several destructions are coming. So there is a clear-cut policy required from the government for the production of large ruminants and to control methane in the irrigated rice. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mr. Najir, would you like to add any comment related to that or anything that you would like to add?
So, on the general theme of agricultural adaptation, and I don't know the specific about the rice. I think this is a huge agenda. It's a complex one because it's about small farmers adopting new technology, new crops, new technologies to save water, and that's a very complicated agenda because small farmers are often, for the right reason, risk averse to change. If there is a lot of risk to change their technology, to change crops, to change the technology in which they use water. But as I said in my introduction, I think this is an agenda that Pakistan will not be able to avoid, and it is related to the food and nutrition agenda, the stunting agenda. So the nexus between water use, crop and agricultural technology, especially for small farmers, in adapting to climate change and for the development of the country and rising incomes is, I think, probably one of the biggest socio-economic climate challenges that Pakistan is facing, in my view. At a more modest level in our contribution, this is, together with girls' education and health, this is the area where we will grow most in our portfolio, supporting farmers, supporting better water use, and why not crop research and crop adaptation. So we can call it an agricultural agenda, we can call it an economic agenda, or we can call it a climate agenda or water agenda. This nexus, I think, is extremely important. And it's not only about money and investing, so this is a bit about choices of individual small farmers. It's hard for government to influence that, but other countries have engaged in that. Pakistan is engaged in that, and we again will increase our support tremendously.
Thank you so much for the insights. May I request Dr. Abid to shed some lights on probably the last question asked and also some general comments?
Well, some cumulative answers to the questions. I think starting from the coal-powered, I think looking at the load shedding situation back at that time, perhaps that was the easiest shortcut. Of course, when we take policy measures, there is never an absolute good or bad policy, but the type of power outage one was facing back in those days when CPEC was negotiated and we were deprived from civil nuclear technology deal. Perhaps that was the easiest solution to fulfill the energy requirements of the country. When your question about the critical plants which had a few emission vis-a-vis that the dirty. So of course there is an evil, lesser evil, and no evil. So what we are talking now is about no evil. That while there are substitutes available to coal, is it possible to increase the share of renewables and reduce our reliance on coal? And Prime Minister has already made this pledge that by 2030, 60% of our energy mix would be green and clean energy. Now we have to see that how the policies they support that pledge. To your question, sir, on small farmers, their presence in Glasgow, I think that can be very easily measured. And if you look at the number of accredited civil society organizations for COP26, you will find that there are quite a few peasant groups, farmers groups, which are accredited as civil society observers to be part, depending whatever the mode of this participation would be, hybrid or physical. But yes, there is a voice, very strong voice of peasant groups, especially Climate Action Network, Khan International, takes this agenda very serious. On your question, sir, about agriculture and rice, I agree with you that we have to shift our rice cultivation patterns. Pakistan and China, they are already working, and I know that in different agriculture universities and in research stations, they are working on some alternative sowing methods, especially this dry cultivation of rice and some other varieties of rice. Pakistan is also experimenting with sea rice, which is a rice species that is cultivated in brackish, saltish water, especially for our areas in Sindh and in some of the brackish areas in Balochistan. Again, that is a joint venture between Pakistan and China. So that variety is also being cultivated here. There is an agriculture transformation plan, which the Prime Minister is quite actively pursuing. And within that plan, some climate smart agriculture techniques are there. So there are bits and pieces. Perhaps what we need to do at a policy level to make some sort of integration and come up with a cohesive plan. So if I look at the various pieces of jigsaw puzzle, which are scattered in different ministries and departments, you can find many success stories, many small islands of success. And I hope someday and somehow we'll be able to pick all those pieces, put them together, and try to complete the picture and see where the deficiencies are and how successful we are.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abid. With this, I would like to conclude this session with the concluding remarks from Ambassador Shafkat Kakavil sir. So may I request you to please come on the stage. I would like to thank you to all the esteemed panelists for the great panel discussion that's been held and the audience to who have participated. So over to you, sir.
I've done the thank yous and all that. So let me start by giving the main points of my presentation. According to climate change and foreign affairs experts, the Glasgow conference is likely to be the most important conference since the conference in Paris in 2020, in which the 2015, in which the Paris Agreement was signed. In my view, it is also likely to be one of the most fraught, one of the most seriously threatened conferences. And let me tell you why. First, about the importance. So let me take you on a journey from Paris to Glasgow. In Paris, the international community agreed on the goal of Paris Agreement is to limit the increase in average temperature compared to pre-industrial levels by a maximum of 2 degrees Celsius, and if possible, to strive for 1.5 degrees Celsius. Paris also established a very elaborate mechanism or structure for international cooperation. So consisting of mitigation, how to achieve mitigation, how to promote adaptation, how to mobilize funds, and how to assist developing countries in technology and capacity building. The agreement is quite elaborate, but the detailed procedures, the modalities and procedures could not be agreed in an international agreement of that nature. So that was left to be elaborated later. And it was done in Katowice. This was COP24. The so-called rule book was finalized. But 1 or 2 or 3 items were left. Now, in 2018, we also had a special session, a special report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. What would it take for humankind to achieve the 1.5 degrees Celsius target? And the IPCC said you have to carry out massive reductions in greenhouse gases. You have to reduce your emissions by half by 2050 and go carbon neutral. Carbon neutral means any carbon that you induct, you have to have the means of undoing its consequences. The IPCC used very strong language to express its very serious concern about the inability of the international community to reduce the emissions. So this sparked a worldwide movement led by youth leaders like Greta Thunberg. And this movement took place all over the world in both developed and developing countries. It has been slowed down a bit by the coronavirus, which has its own set of challenges. But one of the consequences of this scourge, the pandemic, the pestilence, is that the preparatory process for Glasgow. First, the conference had to be rescheduled. It was earlier supposed to be held in 2000, last year. It was rescheduled like the Tokyo Olympics. But the more serious damage was done to the preparatory process because developing countries could not operate the electronic, the Zoom system and all, it broke down. So the other is that the conference in Madrid, 2005, which was supposed to finish the unfinished items of the rule book, the rules of procedure, modalities and procedures, got bogged down in discussions on a single item. It's called Article 6. Hundreds of hours of negotiations were expended fruitlessly on one item. And a lot of other topics were not resolved. So that makes the, under Rule 16, if you can't decide in one conference, you refer to the next year. It's called Rule 16. So that's why the Madrid conference is also called the Rule 16 COP. Now, it increased the volume of work for Glasgow. Glasgow, the agenda runs into 21 pages. So it has all the leftover work from Madrid and it has new items. The other thing I want to mention is the increase in the climate-induced extreme events. There have been virtually hundreds of events such as cyclones, hurricanes. We haven't had a tsunami. Huge flooding, forest fires, flash fires, and droughts, prolonged droughts, and other incidents. Virtually every month, there were dozens of extreme events directly linked to climate change. Now, just before the Glasgow summit last month, the IPCC issued its usual report, which it does after 5 to 8 years. The last report was 2014, and the special report was 2018. This one is called the Assessment Report 6, AR6. AR6 used unusually blunt and strong language. I mentioned it. They said, look, you've run out of the carbon budget. You've already inducted almost all the carbon that you could afford. There's only 400 million tons left. You've inducted 2.4 trillion tons. And if you don't behave, if you don't slash and achieve a drastic reduction, we are headed for 1.5 in 2050 and 2 or excess, maybe 3. Now, any warming beyond 2.2 C Celsius will make it impossible for human beings and species to survive. So, as I said, Glasgow is important because it has to respond to all the scientific community, and it also has to respond to the hundreds of extreme weather events induced by climate change and it must convey a political commitment that our leaders have the capacity. What are the issues that will keep leaders and negotiators? In Glasgow, both our leaders and the negotiators will be dealing with a new generation of climate commitments. It's called the nationally determined contributions. The Secretariat will issue, I think, in the next week, a synthesis report on the so-called forward-looking recommendations or commitments by countries. So politically, the most important thing is there should be a signal. There should be a signal from Glasgow that yes, we are determined to carry out the reductions that are necessary in order to achieve the goals that we set in Paris. Then the leftover work, Article 6, it's a can of worms. It was supposed to be positive, to encourage international cooperation, including carbon trading. But instead, it became a catalyst for all kinds of North-South problems within the South, problems within the North. And I don't know how this, it's a very, very complex issue, which I can explain if we have time. The second most important issue, of course, is finance. So we will have new commitments and an interpretation whether the commitments made by the rich countries respond to the demand. Now, Paris had set a ceiling of 100 billion, which was supposed to be a floor and not ceiling, which means the rich countries have to constantly revise upward their disbursements or their payments to developing countries through the windows, like the Green Climate Fund, Adaptation Fund, the Global Environment Facility, and other, the technology mechanism, the network for capacity building, and all that. Now, the facts on the ground are not very good, because according to UNEP, the 100 billion target has never been achieved. In 2018, the developed countries provided grants and loans amounting to 78 billion. The amounts before those years were much less, ranging between 62 and 70. Now, developing countries were asking for an increase, and here they will consider a report which mentions this. The finance has a number of problems. There is the problem of balance between mitigation and adaptation. Developing countries say the developed countries prefer mitigation, but they need adaptation because that's their problem. They also want the money to come from public sources, whereas the developed countries are including even private investments. And the money that multilateral institutions are providing, every dollar that there is for developing country is put against the 100 billion. And there's also the question of the procedures for obtaining support. And Pakistan has so far received only 25 million from the Green Climate Fund. It's a continuation, phase 2 of the Atta-Abad related project. The first tranche was given by Adaptation Fund when Farooq Iqbal Khan was the vice president. Now, so finance is going to be a tricky question. The third most important and most challenging issue, which scares the hell out of me, is the so-called question of loss and damage. Now, since the negotiations leading to the adoption of the Convention on Climate Change in 1992, the small island states for whom climate change poses genuine existential risk has been asking for compensation. They say, look, we need help on how to avoid the extreme events, sea level rise, cyclonic floods, tsunamis, and also if our homes and places of work and all are damaged, how do we survive? Now in Warsaw, it was agreed to have a mechanism. It's called the WIM, Warsaw International Mechanism. But there's no money. And the United States and Madrid saw to it that there was no commitment to provide money. Other developed countries also said, they said, look, if we compensate developing countries for every event, for the damage caused by every flooding, like the 2010 floods in Pakistan, caused huge losses. We'll run into bills ranging between 240 and 300 billion. Where the hell do we get the money? We don't have the resources and we don't have support for such disbursements. Loss and damage is one issue which, in my view, may be the crunch issue. It could decide the fate of Glasgow. The other issues are relatively less important. And as far as Pakistan is concerned, Pakistan has not been a significant negotiator. Since Farooq Iqbal left, he had a great role in designing the adaptation fund. We basically go along with the like-minded group. But our delegation attends the meetings, coordination, G77 and others to update their knowledge. But you look at the record, you will not find any serious proposal from Pakistan in the conferences of parties. This, of course, doesn't mean that our participation in Glasgow should be at a lower level. We have excellent relations with Britain. The Prime Minister has impeccable environmental credentials. He has been talking about climate change, about environmental issues. It is only proper that he's there and he meets with world leaders, and if possible, the World Bank president will be there, ADB will be there, and heads of agencies of the UN and other countries. China, for instance, China has emerged as a leader in renewable energy. They do the messy job also. There are still hundreds of coal-fired projects, but they are also, most Chinese cities have gone off fossil fuels for their vehicles and all that. So basically, I don't want to stand between you and lunch, but the Glasgow conference is going to decide whether the journey from Paris to Glasgow is responding to the expectations of the international community and the verdict of the scientific community, which has been given in two landmark reports, the special report on 1.5 and the AR5, the assessment report, which was issued last month. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shafkat Takfil Saab. With this, I would like to यहाँ पे काफी हैं वैसे ये ना मैनेजमेंट की जी Sorry, thank you so much, Dr. Kakil sir, for this wonderful concluding remarks. With this, we would like to conclude the session for today. Thank you so much to the honorable panelists we had for this session and this morning. And I hope we all had great insights to the discussion. Thank you so much. Lunch is served outside. Thank you.